So good morning to all of you. I would like to welcome and introduce Cole Weber to the stage to discuss with us this morning the Spark Foundation. Cole Weber is the founder and president of Spark Foundation, a student-run nonprofit with the goal of unlocking the genius in every child. Cole has helped to design over 20 schools across the Western provinces, has represented Canada at the International Summit for the Teaching Profession, has spoken at events from Portland to Indianapolis, sometimes as keynote, is the youngest person to deliver a convocation address in Canada, and is currently serving as an advisor to the Minister of Education. So welcome to Cole Weber.
Thank you. So hi everyone. I want to talk to you this morning a bit about educational change, and I won't talk for a super long time because I do want to have some questions at the end, but I will talk for a little bit. So the modern system of education, and kind of this idea of an industrial system of education, was originally coined around 1825. That's a really long time ago, and I think a lot of people don't really understand just how long ago that is. To give you some context, that's only 11 years after Napoleon was exiled from France, which is pretty insane. Since 1825, a lot of really important stuff has happened. Some of the more significant ones would be electricity, indoor plumbing, public corporations, and the internet, just to name a few. Since 1825, here's what's happened to widely used technologies over the years. And here's what's happened to education. Desks in a classroom, 2 desks in a classroom, 2 desks in a classroom, 2 more desks in another classroom. We've gone through 190 years of some of the most progress-packed time in human history, and our education system still looks almost exactly the same. Why? Why, in a constantly changing world, has education remained such a constant? Is it because these changes aren't really that significant? Well, let me attempt to answer a question with a question. Why is Google's logo colorful? This is the Google logo. It's colorful. And it's actually colorful for a reason. It's not just because it looks pretty, and I find it deeply fascinating. So Google was actually originally started as a school project between co-founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page while they were at Stanford. They had this really interesting idea. What if they could make a program that would crawl through all of the web pages on the internet, kind of make a summary of that information, and put that information to one place? So you could go to this one place and then search through it and search through all of the information on the internet and find exactly what you were looking for. A search engine. So to do this, it was actually really complicated and required a lot more resources than a lot of the other computer projects at Stanford at the time. It required a huge amount of storage because they basically had to summarize the internet. So they couldn't buy computers that were able to do this. They had to actually build their own computer server to link together a bunch of different hard drives. And they were just college students. They didn't have a ton of extra money. So they were buying all these computer supplies anyways. And instead of spending money on a frivolous metal frame, they chose to take a cheaper and much more fun approach, Lego. They built the original frame for the original computer that ran Google out of Lego. So the very first box that Google was in was extremely colorful. And later, when they were making this idea into a company, they decided that their logo should have the original colors of the original Google box. I have the Google logo up here. How many of you needed it? How many of you didn't know what the Google logo looked like? So that company, that little experiment that they did when they built the Lego box that was the original Google, that happened in 1996. So that's less than 2 decades ago. And right now, their premier service is a verb that's used in a lot of circles more frequently than the term look it up, which is pretty incredible. In the time that it's taken for education to go from this to this, companies have gone from essentially a branch of the government that was allowed to operate for profit to something that a bunch of bankers created when they needed a new factory, to something that 2 guys in a dorm room can start and literally change the world. Oh, and you know how I said that in 1996 they needed a huge amount of resources to do this? The huge amount of resource that they need was 40 gigabytes. The flash drive that I'm running my Prezi off of right now is 32 gigabytes. And it's about the size of my thumb. So I find this hilarious for another reason. It only took 40 gigabytes to summarize the 1996 version of the internet. Do you know how Google does this now? They have server farms all over the world. And if you don't know what a server farm is, basically picture a Costco that's floor to ceiling, just rows of computers. And keep in mind that my flash drive, which is the size of my thumb, is about 32 gigabytes, and you'll get an idea of how big the internet is now. So that's just a few of these changes, and that's a really big deal. So despite all of these changes, why haven't we been able to change education then? I mean, I don't think that we're at all the first ones to advocate for change. Why hasn't a change happened? I think that maybe it could be that we're looking in the wrong place. Whenever I bring up this idea of educational change, a lot of times I tend to hear the same thing, which is, we can't do it right now. We're too strained for resources. And that's absolutely true. In education, we often are very strained for resources. But I think that's a challenge to look at resources differently. Because I think if we look at it differently, we'll find that we have really one of the biggest resources that any group of people has ever had. And it's sitting right in front of us every day. I'll give you some context. I find it really interesting to think about the steps that humanity has taken in terms of the time that it took humanity, because I don't think a lot of people think about it like that, and it's just kind of shows you some interesting things. So I'll give you an example. The Titanic, which was a pretty big deal, it was the largest movable object at the time. It took 6,769 years worth of human hours to build. That is, people collectively worked on the Titanic for a grand total of 6,769 years, which is staggeringly impressive. It's kind of a shame considering that the Titanic was only afloat for less than a week, but it's still very staggeringly impressive. And I tried to make these to scale originally. In Prezi, you can't zoom in this far and zoom out that far in the same Prezi. These numbers are too different. So I'll try to give you percentages, and bear with me. So that's nothing. That's just 2% of what it took to build the Great Pyramids, which was 131,200 years worth of human effort, which is crazy. Now that pales in comparison. That's just 8% of what it took to accomplish, I think, what's widely agreed upon as one of the most significant things that humanity has ever done, put a person on the moon. That took 1.7 million years of human hours, which is almost unfathomable when you consider that a human lifetime is like 80 years. This number, however, is absolutely nothing compared to the 85 million years of human hours spent in a classroom this year. That's not a grand total. That's every single year, and that's only K-12. That's not universities, and that's not homework. That's the amount of time this year that will be spent by students around the world sitting in a classroom. That's a pretty dramatic resource. I want to switch gears for a minute here and just talk about some of the stuff that I've had the opportunity to do, because I've had a lot of really cool opportunities over the past 3 years. I've gotten to participate in the design of over 20 real schools that actually got built. I got to be an advisor to the Minister of Education, which was amazing. I got to advise the Alberta infrastructure team. I spoke to over 5,000 people at a convocation address. All of this stuff was outside of school. But does it have to be? Should it be? Our education system was coined at a time where the world moved so slowly that if you needed to deliver a message to somebody, you gave a letter to a person on a horse. And now we live in a world that moves so quickly that somebody who dumps out a bucket of Lego on the floor and asks a really big what if can change the very way that humankind interacts with information in the span of 2 decades. The vast human machines that needed people for all the little cogs that used to drive the world are disappearing, because we don't need people who will sit in a desk and fill out the same form for years on end. We don't need people who will put a screw in exactly the right place 20,000 times in a row. Above all, we need people who will ask, what if? So why don't we play the what if game for a minute? What if you could use this time for something? What could this time do? I was involved in a really cool project about 1.5 years ago. The government of Saskatchewan, they were essentially facing a school shortage, and their solution, they were going to design 9 school sites in one sitting, and each of those school sites had 3 boards, and on top of that, they were going to have input from everybody. This was all going to happen in 1 week, and they were going to introduce this idea of lean, which is kind of a fancy way of eliminating waste that was originally used in car manufacturing plants in Japan. But they were all going to do this in 1 week, so it was a very challenging task, to say the least. And I was actually brought in to facilitate some of the student engagement, because they had a small group of students that was going to come to this event to provide student voice in this process. So at the beginning of the week, we had a meeting with everybody. There were only about 12 kids there. We were off in a small room, just kind of to the side. There was nobody looking, and there was a girl there from, I believe, Saskatoon, and she was too nervous to speak to the remaining 11 students. She wouldn't say anything. She was too intimidated. By the end of the week, we had displayed our models. We had our drawings pinned up on the wall. There were probably about 100 teachers that had been at the event there. There was even more trustees and representatives from the school boards that had participated in this process. There was the Minister of Education, all the higher-ups from the Saskatchewan Ministry of Education, and then at the very back of the room was like a warehouse. It was probably about 2 times the size of this room that we're in now. At the back of the room, there were TV cameras lined all the way at the back. And the person that presented the overall outcome of the project was that same girl, and that was 1 week later. Why would she do that? Because I thought about that a lot. Why would she do that? Why would somebody that was too afraid to speak to 11 people at the beginning of a week be willing to speak to 200 at the end of it? And I think it's because we stumbled upon something really powerful. We talk about student engagement a lot, and student engagement is great, but I think there's something that's even more powerful, student purpose. She spoke in front of all of those people because she knew that it was important, because she thought that she really had an opportunity to make a difference. It wasn't just going to be thrown away. If she spoke and spoke her mind, all of those thousands, all those tens of thousands of students that were going to go in all of those schools over the years would have a better life because of her. And I think that she understood that. So what if we could give this opportunity to everybody? What if we could unite people's passion with their purpose and ignite the spark in every student? Well, that's exactly what we're working on. I founded a nonprofit organization with a bunch of other students from across Alberta called Spark Foundation. And our goal is to essentially unlock the genius in every kid. We're developing a web service to kind of utilize this massive amount of time, just a huge amount of time, to actually spur on educational change. And we're kind of dividing our web service into 3 areas, which is pretty simple. It's based on really what we think education should be. So the first point is that we think education should be connected to the real world. It shouldn't just be an isolated classroom, and it should be connected to the world in a real way, not just you'll use this math that you're doing right now 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, but you can actually see what you're doing have a meaningful impact on your community. We think that schoolwork doesn't have to be just practice. We think that students can work collaboratively to actually solve problems in the world. And we think that student voice is important. We think that students should be listened to just as much as teachers and just as much as administrators. So there are 3 areas of our service that will address each of these kind of points. The first one being Spark Mentors. That will essentially be an online searchable database of professionals and people with unique skill sets that are willing to provide those skill sets to student-run projects. Projects are collaborative online communities where people can work together to both learn and to make the world a better place at the same time. And Stories will be essentially a blog that anybody can post to that will feature and highlight what we can all learn from students and the inspiration that we can gain from them. To give you an idea of kind of how all of this how all of this will work, I'll just run through one of the projects that we're working on right now. So about a year ago, I was brought in. My old elementary school was doing a renovation, and the courtyard, which was kind of considered a hub for the students, was going to be completely remodeled. And they wanted to have student voice in the design of the courtyard, but they thought that engaging the elementary school kids would be too difficult. So myself and some of my friends were brought in. And we actually kind of disagreed with the architects. We thought that it was really important to engage the elementary school kids. So we set about trying to do that. And we kind of framed the engagement really simply, almost as a game, like just a series of steps that the elementary school kids could go through. And it worked phenomenally. I think we only spent about 4 hours total with these group of like 2nd graders. And we saw people who were as young as 8 years old talk about where the focal point should be once you walk into the room. It was actually absolutely incredible. So we think that every school design project should have that input from students. And we think that maybe the reason that people don't get that input often enough is that they're just intimidated and they don't know exactly how. So we're developing one of our first projects, which is the Design Kit project, it's going to have essentially two main goals: to develop an engagement framework and an inspiration file. So we wrote the first draft of the engagement framework based on our experiences with the Courtyard Design Project. It will essentially be a series of steps that you can really easily walk students through to engage them in the design process. That's not written with any industry jargon. It's as simple and clear enough that anybody from a teacher's assistant to a seasoned architect can use it. When you click on this project on our site, you'll be taken through the engagement framework, and at the end of the process, whatever you create with your students, whether it does actually get built or it doesn't get built, will be put into the inspiration file so that we have an accumulation of all of the amazing things that students have done that other students can be inspired by. So that's just one of the things that we're working on, and we're really excited about it. As of right now, there are basically 3 ways to get involved with our organization. The first one is to become a mentor so that you can provide your unique professional skill set to students and really help to change a life. The second one that we're really excited about is essentially a beta test program. We're testing out some of our ideas and our projects in advance so that we can figure out exactly what works, exactly what doesn't work. Right now, the Design Kit project, we're getting ready to test in 2 different school divisions on 2 new construction projects, which we're really excited about. And the third is, of course, donate. And we do have some special incentives that we're offering for that. We've had a lot of opportunity to participate in and run student engagement. And we're offering that as a kind of consulting service in exchange for donations. That's pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about. And I'd like to open the floor to questions. So thank you. Yes.
So I know you've done a lot of work with the design of schools. Can you just maybe speak to that for a few minutes?
Sure. Yeah, I have done a lot of work in design with schools, and I think that it's been a really valuable experience for me because I think it's really the first opportunity that I had to connect my learning to the real world. And it was a really interesting experience. Well, all of the experiences I had with the design school were really interesting because I could see exactly what I would actually need kind of in my life. Like it's interesting. For example, in the Saskatchewan project, we were doing all of the schools in a week, so you very quickly had to make decisions and analyze what was going on and stuff like that. So it's very easy for just even what that shows us about educational relevancy. It's very easy for teachers to kind of say, "Oh, you'll use this in the future." But I actually did get to use stuff there, and it was interesting. First off, to see what I did use and what I didn't use, and it was also interesting to see exactly how I used it, because a lot of times I think the way in which we teach a skill that is used in the real world is maybe different from the way that it's actually used in the real world. For instance, a lot of the math that I do in school is heavily based on formulas and the idea of one right answer, and a lot of times when we were in that process, just because there were so many variables, there wasn't really one right answer. There were different answers that were very close, and each one could be argued for. And it did turn, like math, did turn into something that was more of a collaborative discussion. So overall, I think it was just a remarkable opportunity to really see what the real world was like as compared to education. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do is kind of provide every kid with that opportunity. Thank you. Oh, yes.
I always knew that about math, by the way. I just need to get it on the table. Cole, where are you from?
I am from Red Deer. Yeah.
And we're really, really proud of the work that you've done and of the organization, and certainly very, very supportive. I saw your presentation at Eastview Middle School. You made that presentation to the Premier, and we really, really worked hard at trying to get that school built. But I'm thankful that you have persevered and continued to create new and interesting and innovative ways to think about education, as well as Google. I never knew that about Google, but sharing your big dream with us for a minute.
My big dream. Well, my favorite quote of all time, I think, that I've ever read is, I believe it was from Albert Einstein, and he said, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. And I've had a lot of different opportunities to see a lot of different people and meet a lot of different people and talk to a lot of different people, and that's kind of something that just becomes more and more true to me, that everybody is phenomenally good at something. And I think a lot of times education can become very binary, and we sometimes kind of squander the potential that a kid has, maybe even just because we don't see it. I was once talking to a kid in my art class, and he was kind of considered a troublemaker, and I wasn't really paying attention to what he was saying. And once I realized what he was talking about, I was really amazed. He was talking about this video game, Minecraft, and so that's kind of why I was dismissing him. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of it. But once I actually clued into what he was saying, I realized that he had essentially built a computer out of on and off switches inside of a video game. And that's somebody who was considered a troublemaker and somebody who didn't really do well in school. And that's obviously absolutely not because they're smart. They were very, like, I couldn't do that. I don't think I could do that if I really tried very hard. That would be enormously complicated. And I think that what we can really do as an education system, and what we should really be doing as an education system, is giving everybody those opportunities to explore their passions and really find where their genius lies. And that's really what we're trying to do, and we really want to be able to give that opportunity to every kid, because it's so valuable. We want them to actually see what the real world is actually like, to actually have opportunities to have an impact on the real world, and to gain from that experience and to make the world a better place.